I'm seeing people looking for it in and trying to fill the religion hole in all sorts of different ways.
Yep.
That's been very clear and apparent to me for over a decade, honestly. And I think that, I mean, whether it's wokeism, all these different isms and schisms, and even the way that people responded to a lot of the pandemic stuff and the way they COVID became their religion.
Absolutely.
Right? The vaccination became baptism. The mask became some type of talisman, or like logically it wasn't making sense from a scientific perspective, lots of the behavior, but the tribalism and the way that people were, I was just like, man, this is the religious impulse being applied in a very overzealous fashion to something that you are labeling as science. I see the same with like lots of these different movements. There's this religious zeal to them, but it's totally secular and there's no forgiveness and there's no redemption.
Right.
It's like a horrible secularized version of
just the worst parts of religion, right? None of the best parts.
Yeah, it's like gutting the real frame and truth of it, and just taking it. It's fascinating because I've noticed both privately and even publicly that a lot of people who previously would have called themselves atheists, at a minimum, and I think including some of those names you mentioned previously and many more, even public figures, they've softened their view of Christianity and religion as a whole. You can throw in someone like Joe Rogan in here, right? Who I guess he would be considered an agnostic, but if you listen to a podcast from 10 years ago, he's very antagonistic towards religion. He thought it was stupid, the whole Christianity thing, whatever. Whereas now he's definitely curious and he can at least acknowledge, okay, this gives people a sense of meaning, purpose. There's lots of intelligent there's intelligent arguments for it. It's not just mythology and random stuff that people made up. There's all this history here, views around family, about parenthood, about how you treat and love one another, all of these things about forgiveness. So even people who are not all the way there yet, I'm finding a lot of hearts are softening in that regard. Yeah. And then also a lot of people who are formerly agnostic, I can think of some pretty big examples who just full on going and embracing Christianity, or in some cases Islam or Judaism, other religions. And so it makes me wonder if we're at the very early stages of some type of resurgence revival. It's like this experiment has kind of run and it didn't lead to, if I think back to the atheist movement in the 90s and early 2000s, from what I observed, it seemed like a very prevalent belief that, hey, if we can just get people to stop believing in God and religion and any type of superstition, whatever, then we're going to just enter this Zen-like, hyper rational, hyper kind, and no discrimination, less polarization, more forgiving world. And it's very much been the opposite. That the sort of proof is in the pudding. It's like, okay, well, that's not what happens. Sure, that works for some individuals. There are individuals who are able to, disregard all that stuff and maintain their mental well-being and their values and their morals and the way they treat others and their sanity and however they find a meaning, purpose, community, all of those things. But again, as I've said, it clearly does not seem to be scaling. Right. What seems to be happening is that hole is just being filled up by things that are less truthful and far worse for both the individual and humanity as whole. People are falling into all sorts of nihilism, yes, and just other forms of tribal warfare.
I mean, it makes me wonder, like, when was the last time you saw in pop culture, movies or TV or something, a positive depiction of somebody on a religious quest or achieving a religious... I mean, did you ever see Fleabag?
I haven't seen that.
It's a lovely 2-season TV show out of Britain, and without giving any of it away, she falls in love with a priest, and kind of there's a moment at the end where it's sort of she's overcoming a sex addiction, so she's sort of coming to a spiritual reality. but it doesn't really go all the way or anything. I mean, I still think that depiction would be viewed as cringe or corny or something.
Actually, I can think of one.
Yeah.
Although it was an independent movie, but I guess an obvious one is like Sound of Freedom.
Right.
Yeah.
Where they have a purpose, which is to rescue kids.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely. Well, the thing that blew my mind most in that movie, obviously it's based on a real character, but just him sitting, having a meal with his family. And I think they've got like 5 or 6 kids. And it just rung in my head that I cannot remember the last time I saw like a big family with a lot of kids in almost any type of media.
Right.
It's normally 1 or 2. It's normally 2. And it's rarely even 3. I remember being surprised when I saw the second Avatar movie and the couple had 3 kids. I was like, oh, like it stood out. Like I didn't notice it was rare until I noticed that. And I was like, that's rarer than I previously thought.
Or it's sort of portrayed as sort of
super dysfunctional.
or like sort of like a prejudicial father, like a bigoted father or whatever.
Yeah.
Whereas like the films with like a couple and one child is often sort of sad or kind of lonely. Now, there's a new religion though that has emerged, including is Joe Rogan's religion, which is the religion of UFOs.
Okay.
UFOs are, I think, like when I was with Joe asking about we're talking about UFOs, he said, "Well, I know that I want to believe." He says, "I want to believe." So if you say you want to believe, that's a statement of religion. I was more like, I'm not sure if I want to believe because we don't really know what if they're bad, you know. But I think that there's clearly that's a very powerful new modern secular religion, and I mean that whether or not you think that UFOs are real, in other words, if you think that there's something actually there in terms of a non-human intelligence, but it has really grown as like a movement of people. And there's certainly been some cases where it's been harmful. There's been some UFO cults and, famous one where people have killed themselves.
I'm not actually familiar with these.
I mean, they're hardly worth mentioning. Mostly it's sort of a benevolent movement. There's sort of, they're seeking greater government transparency, which I support. There's a sort of a view of being part of the universe. I mean, there's something really quite lovely about it, regardless of what you think of it. But I do think I think that it's clearly drawing power from people that I think do not get sustenance from traditional religion. Although I will say it's complicated because, of course, there's some very famous Christian believers that are pro-UFOs, and then there's also some atheists that hate it. Matt Walsh
is very pro-UFO.
Matt Walsh being very pro-UFOs. Yeah. And then, people like Steven Pinker and Michael Shermer, and I assume Dawkins from the skeptics that see UFOs as a religion and they don't have anything to do with it. But I do think that, I kind of take some hope from it in the sense that I think it's hard for, like you were saying, most people to be completely atheistic, and so in the absence of a religion, we're going to create a new one.